We have 1,000 reasons. I have more than 1,000 reasons every day to be unhappy with managing companies and staff and people, all that. But then when you rise above that and you choose just who you want to be, I think it makes a big impression on your family, first yourself, and your family and your friends and the people you work with, and then finally our communities. So I think that people are starting to figure that out there. And when they imagine oxytocin levels in our student body, the love hormone, the love chemical, 200 times outside of normal. The latest research on oxytocin is slight elevation in oxytocin. It's impossible to hold a grudge. Now, so then what that means is you feel so amazing that why would you want to hold a grudge against that person? So forgiveness then is not something that you have to try to do to be spiritual. It's the side effect of saying, I don't want to give up this feeling for you or anybody, so I'm letting it go. I'm freeing you. I'm freeing myself. And my goodness, there's more liberation of energy. I call that the natural state of being. And we're knocking on that door. Why? Because as you begin to open your heart to life again, and you start trusting in your future and trusting in yourself a little bit more, and you start self-regulating with your heart, you do that properly, and you lead from that place, from that level of awareness, your life will change in dramatic ways. And why is that essential? Because when people start doing that effectively, oxytocin signals nitric oxide. Nitric oxide signals a chemical called endothelial-derived relaxing factor. And that causes the arteries in your heart and lungs, Jay, to literally swell. Just like when your sexual organs are aroused and blood flow moves into them, male and female, that's a different consciousness. There's a different energy in there. Imagine the same intensity moving into your heart. That's what people are experiencing. That is a level of love. It's not like a love for your puppy. It's not like the love for your partner. This is transcendent of that. This is the most familiar, unfamiliar feeling you will ever have. It'll be distant and at the same time very close. And you'll start to see the hidden meaning behind all things. And now, when you walk in the presence of your greatest betrayer, the person who threw you under the bus, whatever it is, when you walk in from this place, there will be no emotional reaction. You will just see that person for who they are, who you used to be. Now, compassion then is no longer something that you have to try to do. It's the end product of doing the work. And I think that mystics and saints and masters of old understood this. So when they thought of that person, they didn't allow that thought to produce a feeling or an energy that would lower their energy. They understood that when they had the thought of that person, they saw their limitation. It wasn't hurting them. It was only hurting themselves. Now, I think that if the world was doing that, wow, we'd have a very different world. Here's the deal with trauma, and it's kind of an interesting thing because when you're traumatized, some threat or some danger or some condition in your outer world through your senses is changing how you feel in your inner world. And the quotient of change between the way you normally feel in some alarm state, when you change your internal state and move into that emergency mode, you narrow your focus on the cause, and the brain freezes an image and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. And now that image is branded holographically into the brain. So then we remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel, and that memory then changes the person's biology. So they think neurologically within the circuits of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of those emotions, and how we think and feel becomes our state of being. So now the person biologically is changed, and many times it's the strong emotion that begins to select and instruct the gene that creates disease. Why? Yeah. Because if the environment signals the gene, and that's a truth, that's epigenetics, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, the emotion that you feel from that event is literally selecting the gene for you to begin to change. And the genes make proteins. And so the person, if it's strong enough, begins to wear their trauma, not just in their brain. Now it's in their body, because every time they think about that trauma, every time they review it, every time they keep creating the imagery, they keep firing and wiring the circuits in their brain, and they keep feeling the feeling emotionally in their body. And their body is so objective that it's believing it's living in the same past experience 50 to 100 times a day. And all you need is a stimulus and a response, an image and an emotion, a thought and a feeling, and you're conditioning the body into the past. Well, you're conditioning the brain and body into the past.
Why is our memory for pain stronger than our memory of a success or a joy?
I really think that when the survival gene is activated, preservation is the key. So we can have 10 things that happen really great in our lives. You have a family member or somebody you know that does this. They have 10 really great things happen in there, one thing bad, and they focus on that bad thing. Why? Because the survival gene is activated. They want to make sure it doesn't happen again. So you put your attention on it because you don't want it to happen again. So what people do when they're aroused is they start thinking it's going to happen. And so they actually select the worst case scenario in their mind and then emotionally embrace that future before it happens. And they're conditioning their body become the mind of anxiety and fear. So in preservation and in survival, if you prepare for the worst, anything less that happens, you have a better chance of surviving. So that's the mechanism that takes place. So survival means you better take care of your body.
Yeah.
You better be aware of your environment and make sure there's no threats. And so you got to keep your eye out there. And you better be thinking about the future based on what you learned in the past. Now, there's nothing wrong with that when the analytical facilities are in balance. But when there's an arousal, there's three things that create arousal: fear, hostility and anger or aggression, and pain. And that arousal drives the brain into these high states of what we call high beta. And most people need something or someone or some circumstance or some drug or some pill or some computer game to change that internal state. And the moment they notice a change in their internal state, then they pay attention to what's causing it. And they start developing a dependency on it, right? So it turns out that when we teach people how to self-regulate and change their brainwaves, we could actually see then that the incoherence, the disorderliness that's taking place in the brain, when you're over-aroused, you're overly analytical, and you're shifting your attention from one problem to one person to one thing to one place to another problem to another circumstance to your phone to your car. And each one of those elements has a neurological network in the brain. So the arousal causes these different circuits to fire out of order, and the brain is incoherent. So take two waves that are out of phase and mix them. When they interfere, they flatten out. There's no energy. So energy leaves the brain, right? So then when you're in arousal, you narrow your focus on the cause. If there's something rattling in the bushes and it's dark, you freeze and you narrow your focus on it, and there's a rush of adrenaline and your pupils dilate and your heart starts to race and you're ready to run, fight, or hide. I mean, that's a survival moment. But what if it's your coworker sitting right next to you or 6 feet away and you're judging them? You're the same arousal's taking place. And what's once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive. And this is where it gets challenging. So when we teach people how to open their focus, we've done thousands and thousands of brain scans, and they get beyond their analytical processes and they open their awareness and go from a convergent focus to a divergent focus, and they learn how to relax and regulate. Their brain waves start to slow down into alpha. And then if they do it properly and they're connecting, those different compartments of the brain that were once firing out of order start to unify. Different communities form bigger communities. The brain starts to synchronize. And then all of a sudden you start seeing different compartments of the brain all in resonance. So now when they're all in resonance and they start interfering, when those waves come together, there's more energy in the brain. So when a person dials down the mechanism, this neocortex that plugs us into three-dimensional reality, that keeps us aware of our body, that's the autobiographical self, where everything's stitched in memory in there. When we start deactivating the mechanism here, and we get beyond the memory bank of the known self, and brainwaves move into theta, we've studied this so much. When a person can let their body be in a light state of sleep and feel so safe that you can finally let go and surrender, the body is sleeping, but the mind is awake. And now the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is wide open. And if they can regulate and stay there, something amazing happens. There's a release of energy from the body, and their brain goes into a very, very super coherent state of gamma. And gamma is super consciousness. Now, I'm not talking about a little gamma. I'm not talking about a lot of gamma. I'm not talking about a really lot of gamma. I'm talking about a supernatural amount of gamma. There's so much order and so much energy in the brain. Like if we were in an audience and we were all clapping like this, that could be alpha, right? Theta would be, and if everybody could do this, it's slower we could do it, the more we can get our timing down, the more we can get coherent. But if we were doing this, it would be really hard for all of us to do that at the same time. So it takes a lot of order, a lot of awareness, a lot of energy to be able to create that kind of order. So that's how fast the brain is, and that arousal that's taking place is ecstasy. That arousal is bliss. It is the most familiar, unfamiliar feeling that people ever have. And that memory then that the person has that is so profoundly different than the feeling of success, the feeling of wealth, the feeling of orgasm or love or whatever. This is a new one, and it's a thrill. And the person notices a dramatic change in their inner state. And with that experience comes a very lucid picture, a very profound insight, a download of information. That's the moment then. The body many times rewrites the biological program. Energy is informing matter, and the autonomic nervous system is regulating. It's in high order. And remember, disease is autonomic dysregulation. Now it's getting into a very, very high frequency of order, and it's sending very coherent information to the cells and tissues, sending energy to the cells and tissues, and cells begin to emit more coherent light and information. And then there's the disease, and there it's not. How bad does it have to get? I mean, to what denominator, to what lowest level do you have to reach before people really make up their mind to change? My message is, why wait? I mean, when you're feeling so altered emotionally, you feel so bad, that's the moment you could actually see yourself for the first time, because you're not answering your cell phone. You're not responding to all your texts. You're not watching TV. You're not going out to dinners. You're not calling people back. Something's altered in you, and you're starting to become self-aware, right? So then people wait to that lowest moment where they can start to see themselves through the eyes of somebody else. Well, if you're waking up every day and you're combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion, and you're changing your emotional state to be elevated, you could still see the old self from an elevated point of view and stay conscious than from a limited point of view. And that's what I want for people. Like, let's go. I mean, what do you got to lose? What people are going to start wondering, like, did you change your medication? What's up with that guy? Something's different about him. You're not predictable any longer, right? And I always say to our community, when you're changing, you just stop talking about it. You're just too busy being it. Something's happening, and that's the repetition of getting a few days in a row of that really well. I always say, God, if you had a great meditation, you wake up feeling better at the end of that meditation than when you started, and you do that the next day, and then the next day, you're going to start feeling better all the time. And that your body's going to start feeling better, and everything's going to start feeling better. And you're going to start feeling better about life.